Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Removing Barriers, Building Futures. This is with Schoolhouse Connection and Trellis. We're going to be talking about our reports. Welcome, welcome. Us folks are getting settled in, getting connected to our audio. If you want to say, in the chat, tell us where you're coming from, what role you have. Welcome, everyone. And we'll go ahead and get started. Caleb is going to be putting in the chat a copy of today's slides. So if you need to jump off, we'll get a copy of the slides here, but know that we'll be sending the slides as well as the recording out as well. And then Caleb, can you click to everyone? It's early. All right, so just to get us started, this webinar is going to last an hour. It is being recorded. Please type your questions in the Q&A box. We're going to be using the chat box for another feature, so just questions in the Q&A chat in the chat box. You will get a copy of this recording and the PowerPoint slides in a few days. You'll receive a certificate of attendance, and as always, ways to get connected with us at Schoolhouse Connection is to join our Slack community. And I'm seeing everyone from all over the country. Hello, welcome to wherever you're joining us from. If you are new and don't know who we are at Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national nonprofit with our mission to overcome homelessness from prenatal to post-secondary. And we do that by providing strategic advocacy on the federal and state level and practical assistance. A lot of trainings to school districts, higher ed institutions, service providers, youth, students, families. To learn more about us, check out our website, and to join our newsletter, where you can get all that information directly to your mailbox. We also have our scholarship program too, which we will talk about later in the presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Carla.
Hello, thank you. I'm Carla Fletcher, and I'm on the research team at Trellis Strategies. We are a nonprofit research and consulting organization, and we've been in the higher ed research space for about 40 years. We use a variety of research methods to provide insights on the student experience and help institutions use data to drive institutional transformation. Over the past decade, we've been focusing more strongly on student wellness and holistic learner development. And we do that in part through our annual Student Financial Wellness Survey. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute when we get into the methodology.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, Carla. We've enjoyed partnering with Trellis on this project. And here's just a little bit of a roadmap about what we're going to do today. I'm seeing the introductions in the chat. Lovely to see you all. Carla's going to talk about the methodology. Then we're going to talk about some of the main findings, the main key pieces from the report, various strategies to address some of the main findings that we saw, talk about what's next, end with resources, and we'll sprinkle some questions throughout our presentation. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara to share some grounding with us.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. Again, on behalf of Schoolhouse Connection, thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about college student homelessness and strategies for addressing it at the local, state, and federal level. When Carla first shared the Trellis Strategies data with us, the pattern that immediately stood out to me was the harmful impact of homelessness across nearly every basic needs and stability indicator, and that homelessness has an impact above and beyond more generalized measures of vulnerability. That is strikingly consistent with K-12 federal and state data. In K-12, when we compare the outcomes of students who are identified as homeless with other students who are economically disadvantaged, we see meaningful gaps in attendance, academic performance, and high school graduation rates. So taken together, the data tell us that both in K-12 and in higher education, homelessness is a marker for cumulative hardship and barriers. We know this from the data, but we also know it from the lived experience of students, including those students in Schoolhouse Connection's Youth Leadership and Scholarship Program. So in sum, homelessness is much more than the absence of housing. And what that means is that we need distinct, specific strategies to ensure that students experiencing homelessness are identified and supported on their path to and through higher education. Because despite skepticism about the value of higher education today, some post-secondary education remains critical for economic stability and for building a future free from the constant stress and trauma of homelessness. And that's especially true for students who face some of the greatest barriers, those who've been homeless and those with foster care histories. For many of these students, higher education can change the trajectory of their lives and their children's lives. So we have to address both sides of the equation, preventing college homelessness by addressing it before high school graduation and being intentional about identifying and supporting students who are homeless once they enroll in higher ed. That work can't be an afterthought, and we can't assume that generalized initiatives will consistently reach these students. Addressing student homelessness really needs to be a distinct and focused access and retention strategy. So we thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for your partnership, and we look forward to hearing your ideas, your questions, and your experiences. I'm going to go off camera and answer questions in the background if I can. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carla.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. That's such an important grounding context for all of this. And we're so glad that we could partner with Schoolhouse Connection to take a look at this really important issue. So let's talk about the survey. Trellis implements a survey every fall that I mentioned called the Student Financial Wellness Survey, and we do this at higher education institutions across the country. We developed this report that we'll be talking about today while the fall 2025 survey was in the field and in the period kind of afterwards when we're putting the data together. So because of that, this report uses the 2024 data. The 2024 Student Financial Wellness Survey was implemented from October 21st through November 11th in 2024. So students are in the swing of the semester, they are in their classes and they've been in them for a bit. So that kind of gives you context for as they're answering these questions, what that looks like for them. We had 104 institutions across 27 states participate. Invitations were sent to almost 683,000 students, and we received responses from about 53,000 students. The data in the report and what will be shared in this presentation look at students who had experienced homelessness compared to students who had not experienced homelessness and first-generation students who had not experienced homelessness. These designations are based on responses to particular questions in the survey. So among those who had responded to the homelessness scale, 9,704 were classified as having experienced homelessness, and 33,175 had not. And among those who identified also as first-generation students, 11,662 had not experienced homelessness. So let's take a look at the homelessness scale. Homelessness is defined as lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. This is the federal definition in the Higher Education Act and the McKinney-Vento Act that both K-12 and higher education institutions are required to use. So we ask students a series of questions about their housing situation to get at these elements. The first one asks for them to self-identify if they have experienced homelessness since they've been in college. And then the remaining questions ask if they had experienced certain situations in the past 12 months. This includes being thrown out or forced out of their home, being evicted, staying in a shelter, staying in an abandoned building, not knowing where they would sleep at night, not having a home, couch surfing while not having their own housing, sleeping outdoors in places like streets or alleys, sleeping in places not meant for human habitation like a vehicle or a tent, or moving in with others due to financial problems. So across all of these, if they responded that they had experienced it, we consider them to have experienced homelessness. Now, in general, homelessness, other basic needs insecurity, and other hardships are fairly comparable when looking at students who are under 25 compared to students who are 25 and older. So for this report, we chose to look at all students together regardless of age, and we use the term students for them. Now, some of the strategies may be geared towards specific ages. So for example, supports in the transition from high school to college are obviously geared towards younger students, while others are broader and would be beneficial for students of any age. And those are made clear in the strategies sections, but overall in the data, when we talk about students, we're including students of any age. And then for my last slide, before I turn it back over to get into the presentation, we wanted to specifically call out students with foster care experiences, as Barbara kind of alluded to. Students who had experienced homelessness were more likely to have been in foster care. And the number of former foster youth students is small, but it is 4 times higher among students who had experienced homelessness compared to those who had not, and twice as high among first generation students. So these combined hardships can make higher education access and success particularly difficult for these students. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the survey. If they've come in, I can also answer them later if they come in later. So happy to do that at any point. I know there's not a lot of time for people to have entered, so I'm kind of vamping here while people have time to enter some questions.
I did see one question, Carla, actually, which I think is you can clarify, which is somebody asked if students could simply state they were homeless or if their homelessness had to be proved.
No, it's just self-reported in the survey, so they could simply just state that they've been homeless.
Great. And if you have more questions for Carla, we know that maybe other questions will pop up once we get into the main findings. Please put it in the Q&A and we'll have time. But thank you, Carla, for getting us that grounding so we can get into the meat of everything, the main findings. But first, we wanted to do a quick little poll question here. And let me find, the poll. All right, so a poll question is going to pop up and we'd love for you to answer it. How many college students do you think self-identify as homeless? And I'm loving to see all the ticking. A poll should have popped up for you all that you can just press a button. Is it 5%? Is it 14%? Is it 21? Is it 44%? And we'll give it a few more seconds here. And I've been looking at the chat throughout the whole time, and it's been so great to see a lovely mix of our high school friends, our K-12 and higher ed friends, a really, really nice mixture of people all across the board. Okay. I'm going to end the poll and launch it, the results. Hopefully people can see that. So about 25% people said 5%, 41% said 14, 30% said 21, and then we had a few people, 4% said 44. And the answer is actually, sorry for the suspense, it is 21%. So looking back to those questions that Carla had shared, 21% of students self-reported homelessness. But when they were looking at the other questions, the circumstances, the situations that students were in, 50% of students said that they were couch surfing. 73% of students said that they were sharing housing with others due to financial problems. And so student homelessness is often hidden. It is frequently going unidentified and therefore just really easy to miss. And so if we're only creating systems and designing supports that only require self-identification for students to click just that single box that says homelessness, we are going to systematically miss out on so many other students who need that help. And there's a lot of reasons why. There is stigma maybe associated with homelessness. Maybe students don't know that homelessness can be a wide range of things like couch surfing, like staying in a car, like staying with others in unstable situations. There is a wide variety of examples of what homelessness can look like. And so they might not necessarily associate with that word, but they do technically qualify and are considered homeless. So just wanted to highlight that 21% self-identified as homeless, but much more students are in situations that actually are eligible and are considered examples of homelessness. So let's get into our main findings here. And how we framed our main findings is sharing some common misconceptions about college students experiencing homelessness and presenting that with some of the findings from the report. So a really popular misconception that I see all the time that I hear is that we have a food pantry. We're fine. All of our food problems, they're all solved. We have a food pantry. It's great. Students are using it. All good. Check mark. We're done there. But that's not actually the case. So what we are seeing, and in this report, students who have experienced homelessness face deeper and just more layered hardship compared to their housed peers and first-generation students. Students experiencing homelessness are 72% more likely to experience food insecurity compared to, again, first-gen and students who aren't experiencing homelessness. And the fact that students are experiencing homelessness or experiencing hunger at much higher rates is really striking, given that so much of the basic needs movement is addressing hunger. And not to say that hunger isn't important, because it definitely is, but that is often the first thing that campuses do to address basic needs is a food pantry. However, they aren't reaching our students. They aren't reaching students experiencing homelessness. And so some key questions to ask at your institution are, can students experiencing homelessness physically access where the food resources are? Is this food portable? Is it non-perishable? Is it accessible to students who might not have a safe place to cook or prepare food? If a student is living in their car, it's going to be really hard to cook up ramen if they don't have a microwave with access. Another key piece are, do food plans account for students who are staying on campus during academic breaks? So during gap housing, whether that's winter or during summer, we've worked with a lot of institutions that thankfully provide housing for students during this time, but the dining halls are closed. So then where do the students go? Maybe the food pantry is there, but it could be just really limited hours. And maybe some students have never used the food pantry before up until that moment, and they don't know how to access it. So we really want to be cognizant of providing these wraparound services, especially with food, if we are providing that housing resource as well. Another misconception that ties to one of our key findings is that students experiencing homelessness, they just need to get a job. They just need to work, A lot of people work while they're in college. It's just a common thing that you need to do. Students experiencing homelessness, they just got to get a job. What the report is finding is, our students are working. They are working higher rates compared to our first-gen students not experiencing homelessness. And not only are they working, but they are working more than 40 hours or more per week. So 39% of students are working these 40 hours or more per week compared to 31% of students who aren't experiencing homelessness. And because they're working such long hours, they are at a higher likelihood to potentially miss class because of work conflicts. And we see this and we hear this time and time again from students who are really juggling between work so that they can pay for X amount of things, and could be at risk of homelessness if they don't get that money. So the work intensity for students experiencing homelessness is significantly higher. And it's important to note that financial hardship is nearly universal. So while they, again, are working and having more hours than their peers, there are some things that we want to consider for our students experiencing homelessness, like, can we prioritize students for work study or other on-campus jobs like resident assistants? That is a great way to also help alleviate the cost of housing for being an RA, especially during the summer. If a student needs summer break housing, that is a great way to get that resource. And another thing I wanted to note with financial hardship is that while many students might be experiencing this financial hardship, in the report, we noted that about 95% of students experiencing homelessness use credit cards to pay for basic needs, basic expenses, but only 34% pay their balances in full. So that can further contribute to further debt and other financial hardship. So it's really important that we are having that financial literacy conversations with our students as well. Another possible misconception is that transportation is a side issue. It might not be one of the immediate things when we think about basic needs, but it does have a huge impact for our students. Students experiencing homelessness are twice as likely to miss class compared to their peers because of transportation issues. We are seeing a lot of great partnerships that are happening to kind of address some of these issues, whether that's Uber and Lyft credits, or partnering with shuttle services within the area if that's available, even partnering with potentially car rental services to have that partnership with students, because we know a lot of our students might not be under the age of 25 or 26. So just really great partnerships to kind of address this issue here. Another possible misconception is that mental health supports are just an optional add-on. Again, it might not be one of the top things to address in terms of basic needs, but it is something that we really want to prioritize for our students, because our students experiencing homelessness are more likely compared to their peers, first gen and not experiencing homelessness, to have a major depressive disorder or to have a generalized anxiety disorder. So all of these things that I've just talked about, these are not isolated barriers. They intersect, they accumulate, they interact, really increasing the likelihood of students potentially stopping higher education before completing, because they all can compound on top of one another. And then lastly, which is what Barbara alluded to in the beginning with our grounding session, is that, with all our basic needs policies and programming, it will naturally reach homeless students. And while that is certainly definitely, the case, basic needs initiatives are essential and critically important. But what our findings show is that these generic approaches might not consistently identify or fully address the distinct and layered reality of students experiencing homelessness. So only 49% of homeless students agreed that their institution had adequate financial support services, compared to 62% of their peers. And as I stated before, we really want to be intentional, because homelessness is distinct. And so we want to make sure that we are improving persistence and completion so that we can intentionally identify students experiencing homelessness, disaggregate data to understand their distinct needs. We want to pair broad basic needs supports with targeted strategies, because again, that example of the food pantry, it's not reaching our students. So there might be other examples that we think that they're reaching them, but they just aren't. So we need to have that cross-coordination, cross-sector response between housing, workforce, public benefits, higher education, even K-12 on care for our incoming students, to really provide that holistic wraparound support that is targeted for college students experiencing homelessness. So all those main findings, we're now going to talk about strategies to address some of those pieces. But before we get into that, another quick poll here, and let me see if I can do it this time. Okay, we'll do back. I am curious if people can share what they think is the biggest challenge in supporting college students experiencing homelessness. So is it identification and navigation support? And in the report, we really focus on having a homeless higher education liaison. And if you're like, I have no idea what that word is, I have no idea what you just said, we will talk about that in depth. Is it around emergency aid? Is it around gap and year-round housing support? Is it that key piece, that transition from high school to higher education? Is it financial aid? And if you're like, none of these are really speaking to me, put it in the chat, let us know. And that'd be helpful for us just to be mindful and cognizant, because there might be a barrier that we are just not aware of. But these are some of the things that popped out on us for the report. Yes, Francesca, all of the above. They are all of the above. Amazing. We'll do a few more seconds and we'll talk about at least two of them in depth, but we have information about all of these resources on the slides as well. Something's popping up here. Okay, so let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So about 40% of people said identification and navigation support, homeless higher education liaisons. We're definitely going to spend some time talking about that. 8% said emergency aid. 26% said gap and year-round housing support. And I'm seeing in the chat as well, housing is just a big barrier, a big challenge. And then 14% said the transition from high school into college. And then 12 said financial aid. Amazing. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into definitely higher ed liaisons and the gap year-round housing. But all of these slides, you have a copy of them so you can read through them too. But just one, oh, sorry, didn't mean to share the results again. Cool. Okay. Identification and navigation support, really focusing on homeless higher education liaisons. So students, they can't access what they can't find, what they can't navigate, and what might not exist in a coordinated way. And this is how a homeless higher education liaison can help. They can serve as a single point of contact to help identify students and then connect them to all the available resources that might be on campus or off campus within the community. And again, if you are like, I have no idea what a homeless higher education liaison is, that is completely okay. In the pre-K to 12 side, there's a law, McKinney-Vento, and within that law, there's a designation of a McKinney-Vento liaison. And all these things that I'm talking about on a higher ed side, they do that in the pre-K 12 side. But we don't have that same legislation on the higher ed side yet. We'll talk about that in just a second. But we are seeing some institutions, we are seeing some states really use this as a best practice. They've had policies, they've made these designations for homeless higher education liaisons to help ease that transition and to help, again, assist students who need the most support with navigating all of the things on the higher education side. But just designating, just saying, you are now the homeless higher education liaison, that's just the first step. You really need to provide ongoing training. There needs to be institutional commitment to really ensure that students are getting all the support that they need. And that is something that we definitely have noticed at Schoolhouse Connection. The designation is really, it's not enough. It's just the first step. And I know in higher education, you're wearing multiple hats, and this might just be like another other duties as assigned. I worked in higher ed, I understand that, but there really needs to be targeted and intentional training. And so we have come in at Schoolhouse Connection to provide that training to higher ed liaisons. Over the last 3 years, we have created a homeless higher education liaison learning network. This year, in our 3rd year, we have reached over 26 states. We have over 100 homeless higher ed liaisons throughout the country. And if you are a homeless higher ed liaison, or if you're interested in joining, or if you're not sure if you're the homeless higher ed liaison, please reach out to me. I'll have Caleb put my contact information in the chat. We'd love to have you join our learning network. We meet quarterly. Our next meeting is at the end of the month. So yes, there is still time. And I also just want to put a reminder to please put your questions in the Q&A just so we don't lose them. And another thing I wanted to note is that, again, there's currently not federal legislation for homeless higher ed liaisons, but we have seen some states have policies that either establish or authorize states to designate a homeless liaison. So if you're in one of these states, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Tennessee, and Nevada, you might have a homeless higher liaison on your campus. And if you're like, I'm in this state and I still don't know what you're talking about, again, reach out to us, because we're really trying to help build out this implementation, because policy is nothing unless the implementation is strong, and we definitely want strong implementation of such an important role. I'm now going to turn it over to Barbara to talk about some possible upcoming federal legislation.
Great. Thanks, Jillian. So we recognize that there's an urgency to student homelessness, and we need local solutions, we need state level solutions, and we also need federal solutions. So this legislation, the Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth Act, is hopefully soon to be reintroduced. It's always been bipartisan. It has always been bicameral. And so we've had some changes in leadership over the last session of Congress, but we are poised for reintroduction. And essentially what this would do is take some of those key pieces that we have in K-12 for homeless and foster youth and adapt them to higher education. So it would require institutions of higher ed to designate a liaison for homeless and foster students, plan for housing during break, and many other pieces. So stay tuned. If you're interested in the federal policy piece of this, you can sign up on our website for federal policy updates, but we do expect this one to be coming soon. The other thing I'll just add too is that as I'm watching the chat and the questions, there are many states and communities and institutions that are doing things even absent of a federal or state law. We have great programs highlighted throughout the report. So just to put it, if you're interested in the emergency housing or break housing or any of these pieces, we tried to highlight some local examples of innovation that are happening now, even absent a federal or a state mandate. So back to you, Jillian.
Thank you. And that's a great reminder. If you are doing at your institution, or if you're in a K-12 and your partner higher ed institution is doing a really good job with identification and just, helping students, please share any of these best practices in the chats, because we read through the chat, we look through it, and we will definitely want to follow up and highlight the great work that is happening. All right, I'm actually looking at time, and I think we can go through our strategies. So I'm gonna just run through them. Emergency aid. Okay, so on campuses, institutions might offer emergency aid to address short-term crises, and it can vary in amount. Maybe it's only $500, maybe it's only $300, it could be $1,000. It really varies based on the institution. But during the pandemic, there was specific funds that was allocated to higher education institutions to help with emergency aid, to help with these short-term crises because of COVID. And there was research from the pandemic that found that 50% of students who used emergency aid, all those funds went towards housing, whether that was because of eviction, whether it's because of needing help with utilities, maybe they lost their job and they needed help with rent. So most of the reasons why students were using emergency aid is related to a housing cost. And so some things, and these are just a few examples, a few considerations. We have more in our report, but just we really want to be mindful of making sure that emergency aid is accessible and responsive to homeless students. So have a good look at your eligibility requirements, restrictions, see if it is not intentionally, but if it is maybe exclusive to students experiencing homelessness. In addition to emergency aid, let students know about other wraparound support. Even better if you can connect the student to the homeless higher liaison or a basic needs person on the campus, just so they can provide additional support in addition to just the aid, the money. We also want to highlight and make sure that campuses are aware that their policies and are really clear and have that awareness that emergency grants should not be counted against the cost of attendance. This is one of the changes that happened from the FAFSA Simplification Act. So we just want to call that out specifically, because that's one of the changes that kind of flew under the radar with all the million other changes that happened with FAFSA simplification. So just wanted to do that highlight. A few spotlight things that we wanted to share. So CSU Bakersfield in California, again, noticing that a lot of emergency aid was going towards housing related costs. So they actually have their own housing specific emergency funds that explicitly cover security deposit, first month's rent, and eviction prevention. And I know other institutions have, again, housing specific emergency funds. And on a federal level, we want to highlight the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant Program. This provides financial assistance to low-income students. And just in light of evidence that emergency aid really supports persistence, we are encouraging Congress to allow institutions to use a portion of their funds specifically for these emergency microgrants. All right, our next third big strategy, gap in year-round housing. So this data really underscore that, again, college homelessness is really hidden, and it's consistent with a lot of the other basic needs research that we are seeing. But just because that these situations are less visible, it doesn't mean that these are any less serious. And that we want to be mindful and cognizant that students and institutions should still recognize these individuals as experiencing homelessness. So some ways to support gap and year-round housing options, especially if your institution has a residence hall, prioritize students experiencing homelessness for the housing access. We know this might be possible already for certain other populations, maybe for international students, for RAs, for athletes. Let's loop in our most vulnerable students into this population as well so that they can have housing. And even better, can we put them in housing that is year round so that they have that full, again, wraparound support? Can you also utilize residence halls during breaks and emergency housing? At Schoolhouse Connection, in partnership with Pearl Strategies, we have been working with the SUNY system in New York with 3 SUNY institutions to really build up their gap housing. One institution is focusing on Thanksgiving, one institution is focusing on winter, one institution is focusing on summer. And so with all these resources and all these materials, we're getting a really nice insight of, how can we tap into the residence halls to provide that full year-round housing. And not even just housing, but again, that wraparound support, food, transportation, mental health, all these other pieces. Another really interesting consideration is, can you defer housing fees for vulnerable students, including our homeless and foster youth, until after financial aid is dispersed? Students might not have the funds to cover housing fees because they're waiting for their financial aid. So is that something that you can work with your institution to allow certain student populations to pay afterwards? And then lastly, formalizing community partners. Again, really, really, really important for our communities, for our higher ed institutions that don't have residence halls, having partnerships within hotels, motels in the area, college-focused rapid rehousing shelters, host homes, and just other strong community partners. So I'm going to talk first about Westchester University and then turn it over to Barbara to talk about even more upcoming federal legislation. Westchester University up in Pennsylvania, they have an amazing program that is specific for unaccompanied homeless youth and foster youth. They do a lot of support, but specifically want to call out, they provide year-round housing. They provide access to on-campus employment. They have, the basic needs access and other programs and resources. They have a designated point person to support these individuals. Thank you, Caleb, for adding more information about Westchester University's Promise program. So really great institution to highlight if you are interested. And I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk about some upcoming federal legislation.
Thank you. So we already talked about one of these, and again, you have a copy of the slides, and these are in the report as well. The hyperlinks, when you have the slides, will take you to more information. The 2 pieces I want to call attention to, the very first one, Housing for Homeless Students Act. This also we expect to be reintroduced. It is a bipartisan, bicameral, costs nothing piece of legislation that would address the issue specifically by allowing students, full-time students, to live in housing created through low-income housing tax credits. Right now, with the low-income housing tax credit program, you can't live in that housing if you're a full-time student unless you meet any number of exceptions. So, for example, foster youth and other designated categories can be full-time students and live in LIHTC housing. The challenge for students experiencing homelessness, of course, is that if they are not full-time students, they may lose scholarships, and they're essentially put in the position of having to choose between their education and having a place to live. So this legislation we expect again to be introduced. There's a lot of energy behind it this year, and one that we might actually see get to the finish line. So again, it would address the issue of housing by really removing a barrier to creating, developing housing specifically for college students. The second piece of legislation recently reintroduced, gets at this issue. I saw some chatter about this in the chat, of these different definitions of homelessness and the fact that the housing definition of homelessness, which you need to meet in order to be eligible for HUD homeless assistance, excludes the vast majority of college students who are homeless, as well as children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. So this legislation would amend HUD's definition of homelessness so that if you're identified by somebody working in another federal program that has a broader definition, so for example, a McKinney-Vento liaison, a financial aid administrator, you would be eligible for HUD homeless assistance. Doesn't guarantee you receive it, but at least you can be assessed along with everybody else. So that also is legislation moving forward. I won't talk about the other ones because we've already talked about them, but simply to say that we got really good news yesterday, as a matter of fact, late last night. We also are expecting there to be legislation introduced that is modeled on some of the amazing housing nonprofit partnerships that we see happening across the country right now, to essentially create a demonstration program, a pilot, to fund nonprofits who are providing housing in partnership, community-based housing in partnership with institutions of higher education. So stay tuned for that very soon. So again, more information on federal policy and all of these developments, please sign up on our website. I'll turn it back over to you, Jillian.
Thank you, Barbara. All right, our last strategy that I want to talk about is to transition from high school into college. So as Carla mentioned, for some of our older students who are experiencing homelessness, this might not be the most applicable to them, but for our students who are coming from high school to higher ed, that pipeline, this is for them. I love saying this quote, and it stuck with me. I've been with Schoolhouse for 8 years, and in my first year, we had one scholar say that graduating high school was the most devastating day of her life, because she lost all the support that she built throughout the 4 years of high school, and she had to start over on the higher education side. On the day that was supposed to be so celebratory, she was absolutely devastated. And that quote has just really stuck with me. But we really want to focus and talk about the transition from high school into college, because we know it's such a precarious time. Students might lose that support. They might experience summer melts. And despite these challenges that we are sharing and we're experiencing, some of the basic needs initiatives, they don't include college transition as a targeted prevention strategy. So here are some things that you can do to help ease that transition, to provide that warm handoff. Number one is build that partnership between your local high school and local college or university, to just have that warm handoff. Maybe it could be with FAFSA nights. Maybe you're doing special tours, just any connection between someone on the K-12, someone with a higher ed, to ease that transition for the student, so they don't have the most devastating day of their life when they graduate from high school. Maybe there are summer bridge programs that are available. Even better if these summer bridge programs are inclusive of unaccompanied homeless youth, former foster youth, other students who may be independent on the FAFSA. And that brings me to like using existing foster youth transitions infrastructure and expand it to include homelessness. So our foster youth friends, they have just a little bit more support set in place on the higher education, post-secondary education side compared to students experiencing homelessness. And we know there's a lot of overlap between our two populations. So looking at spotlights, really want to spotlight two groups here. FAN, the Fostering Academic Achievement Nationwide, they bring together leaders, foster care and higher ed orgs to again create that pathway and remove barriers for students in foster care. We've partnered with FAN a lot, and they have been great partners, but they are also being inclusive and mindful of students experiencing homelessness, because again, that overlap between the two populations. And then Embark Georgia Center, I saw David in the chat earlier, so I know he's here, but Embark, really great friends of Schoolhouse Connection in Georgia. They have a statewide initiative to designate college access and retention for youth who have experienced foster care and homelessness. So within the Georgia system, there are designated points of contact for homeless and foster youth, and they really focus on that transition piece. So I think Caleb has linked to both of FAN and Embark Georgia in the chat if you want to learn a little bit more. So this was not in the report, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention financial aid, because at Schoolhouse Connection, we receive a lot of emails and calls about financial aid because it is such a crucial first step on accessing post-secondary education. So for youth who are unaccompanied, youth who are on their own and experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness and self-supporting, they are considered independent students on the FAFSA. Going back to our very first question, I think someone had asked, like, do students need to prove their homelessness for the Trellis survey? No, they didn't. But for the purposes of the FAFSA, they might need to provide some sort of documentation, an unaccompanied homeless youth letter from certain authorized entities that say they meet this definition. If you want to learn more about that, check out our FAFSA page. We have a wealth of knowledge there. And I'm going to ask Caleb to put his contact information in the chat because he gets a lot of FAFSA questions. He is our FAFSA completion senior manager. He is a past financial aid administrator, and also he was a homeless higher education liaison at his past institution. So he has just a wealth of knowledge for supporting our students. And if you have any questions, go to Caleb. All right. So we talked a lot, or I talked a lot about various strategies. Those are just a few. So in our report, we have strategies at a glance, and all the strategies that I talked about, we have it broken down for, what can you do if you're in a higher ed institution, or if you are within a state or federally, what are the different roles and pieces and kind of your strategy, recommendations, action steps. So these are just some screenshots of the various things that you can do. You can see more in our report, but just wanted for you to see that we have a little bit more that we didn't get into listed in the report. So what is next? As Carla mentioned, this was 2024 data that we used for this report. We're excited to announce that Trellis is going to have updated data with the 2025 in April. So stay tuned. We will have an update on this report with the new 2025 data, which we'll be excited to share out with you. And we'll be sure for folks who are registered for this webinar, once this new report is out, we'll send it to all the registrants. So just some last key takeaways. Again, you've heard me say these things probably a few times, but just really want to highlight these key takeaways. Homelessness among college students is a lot more common than what people realize. And it's often because homelessness is hidden. And if we aren't intentionally identifying homelessness, we will continue to underestimate and underserve these students. Homelessness drives cumulative and cascading barriers that can get in the way of persistence and completion. As we know, they are intersecting, they can keep compounding on top of one another, all these various hardships. And so as a result, we really want to make sure that our solutions are targeted because homelessness is distinct and our responses must be intentional and not incidental. I like to end just with a quote from one of our scholars. They said that higher education is important to me because it offers financial stability, access, and proximity to opportunities that can lead to higher wages and long-term economic mobility. Persisting through college is how I position myself closer to jobs, networks, and resources that are often out of reach for students facing housing instability. Even when my basic needs are unmet, continuing my education allows me to assert agency over my life and work toward economic security. I persist because education remains one of the most reliable pathways to stable income and upward mobility. Really powerful quote from one of our scholars, and it really lends itself to this next slide that our scholarship program is so amazing. We have amazing students, amazing scholars. This application is available now, and it goes until June 2nd. And these are for students who are currently juniors in high school or current seniors who are taking a gap year. We provide wraparound services, one-on-one support, multiple trips. We have 2 staff members on our team, soon to be 3 staff members on our team, just to really provide all of these things that I talked about as strategies. We're able to do that at Schoolhouse Connection and just really be another sounding board, another supportive adult for our students. So here is information. Kayla put the link in the chat. But please, please, please encourage your students to apply. As we're getting ready for our Q&A, I just want to highlight and point out our resources slide. We link to the report here, first bullet point, our higher ed page, including tips for helping homeless youth succeed. And these all have examples of institutions that are doing great work by topic areas. And these are living Google Docs that we update. We have our FAFSA page, our federal policy page, our youth leadership and scholarship page, but also want to highlight we have 2 upcoming webinars happening in April. That is next month. 2 webinars in April. One is on build successful high school to college transitions for students experiencing homelessness. We have friends from Cincinnati, from the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Public Schools. Really amazing partnership there. They've done some awesome work to help with retention, and that's on April 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then back by popular demand, Caleb will be doing a session, FAFSA and Homeless Youth, Scenarios and Solutions. We go through about 8-ish scenarios. If you love polls, it's just a lot of polls we show scenarios, real life examples of students who might be an unaccompanied homeless youth on the FAFSA. We're not really sure, it's kind of funky. We run through those and it helps kind of tease them out a little bit. So if you have questions about the FAFSA, that is the one for you. But I'm going to see what questions we have in the chat, but just ways to connect with us at Schoolhouse Connection on socials, our contact information as well, and then ways to get signed up for our newsletter if you are not already there. But I'm going to put our contact information up while we look at questions. So Barbara, I don't know if you want to come off and share any particular questions that we are noting or seeing that we want to ask out loud.
Well, I'll start just recognizing a comment that food pantries on campus are nearly always intended to be supplemental in nature and not an option that will cover someone's entire food needs. So that is very true. And I think the challenge for students who are experiencing homelessness, as we've heard from the students in our program, is do they know where the food pantry is? Is it portable? So it's absolutely true that pantries are a first step and they're critical, and that they're not intended to necessarily to be the full solution, and that homelessness can create barriers even to accessing what's already there. So just wanted to lift up and acknowledge the truth of that statement. I'm looking at other questions, and Caleb, if you saw some that came into either about the methodology, the survey, or about any of these challenges or strategies. Looking for.
I do see something in the chat. You will receive an email with this recording, the slides, a copy of the report, and the upcoming webinar links. So we will definitely share that out with you. You'll get that probably tomorrow or early next week.
And I'll read another one. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm actually hoping that there are people listening to the webinar who do have an answer and might be able to share something in the chat. It's a specific question, but our community was particularly affected by the war on drugs, and our university has a specific initiative to support formerly incarcerated students. Finding housing for these scholars is especially challenging. Are you aware of anyone working on systems level practices for housing for systems impacted college students? Any resources to recommend? So I don't know if Carla or Caleb knows, or if there are people who are listening who have some solutions to put in the webinar, or if send us afterwards, and we would be happy to reach out to the person who is asking that question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Carla, did you have something?
I don't. I was just going to say, I wish I did. That's that's a scenario that I had not thought about, and I don't know of a program, but it would be great to hear if there is a school out there who knows that and can put it in the chat. I'd be so interested to hear about anything that a school is doing to help with those populations.
And Caleb, this one, it looks like I can't tell if you're in the process of answering it already, so you may be, but do you know where we can find more information about the emergency funding, emergency aid funding, and the relationship to cost of attendance updates for the FAFSA Simplification Act?
Yes, I have been looking around for a good link that is not just buried in uh, official technical language and that's a little more digestible for people who don't live and breathe financial aid. So I haven't been able to find something that's very public facing, that's not meant for financial aid administrators. So that might be something that we put out in the next couple of weeks, just breaking that down on our own website. So stay tuned. We can put something out that's a little more digestible and public friendly that has information on that.
Awesome. And I do see there are some people who are responding about some of the solutions for systems impacted college students. So we typically after a webinar go through all the comments, go through all the chats, try to compile things and make sure that you've got your questions answered. So we'll do our best to get everything back out to people.
Awesome. And if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us here. Our contact information is listed, but also if you have the time, if you don't mind filling out the evaluation afterwards, we do go through the evaluations that it has just a wealth of knowledge. So put your follow-up questions there. We do reach out back to you if that is something that you want us to do, or if you have, again, just a really great practice. We always want to highlight that work that you are doing. But Carla, thank you so much for your partnership at Trellis. So we are excited for round two once we get that April data. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a lovely Wednesday, and we will see you soon. Thank you.